Recording in progress. Hi, everybody. Al Iverson here. I am Director of Deliverability Products for Kickbox, deliverability tools and email verification vendor. Brian and I represent Kickbox, but today we brought with us my good friend, Tonya Gordon from Klaviyo, and we're going to talk all about deliverability and try to have a little bit of a focus specifically on Klaviyo clients and what specific things you should be aware of, what you can do to help maximize your deliverability success. So Tonya, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yes, absolutely. So I am Tonya Gordon. I am, as Al said, with Klaviyo. I manage the deliverability and compliance strategy team. And we actually focus on our larger customers, providing them with actual strategies on getting to the inbox and getting the most out of their email campaigns. And so the most ROI, etc. So
awesome. It's a good mix of Tonya with the consultant and ongoing engagement expertise with clients, and me more the product manager side of things, working on like building our little suite of deliverability tools. So hopefully we cover sort of both ends, the technical and the strategic. And how do slides work?
Yeah, slides. And we've both been doing it for a few years.
Yeah, before Kickbox, I was director of deliverability for Salesforce, working on the Marketing Cloud platform for about 150 years, or more like 15 years. It felt about 10 times that. But so, yeah, I've been doing the deliverability thing for a long time. And in fact, I was just arguing with somebody on Reddit yesterday about how I don't look like somebody that's managed MTAs and worked with block lists. And I'm thinking back to 25 years ago, what was I doing? I was setting up a mail server and setting up a spam block list. So yeah, I guess I've been doing it for a while.
Exactly. I know every year that number ticks up and I'm like, oh, I'm saying 20 plus years. I don't know if I like this.
Yeah, it is. I don't like the numbers growing. It's a fun thing to keep on top of though, because it doesn't stay still, does it? I mean, it's always changing how things work and what the sort of the practice of deliverability is. It doesn't stand still. You have to keep learning to keep up with it.
That's always been my sticking point, is I love to continually learn and do new things, and this deliverability is that. So if you think you know everything about deliverability, just wait a month or two and there'll be something new that it comes up that you don't know. So
exactly. And so that's why we're talking about deliverability today. And I think a good place to start for that is delivery versus deliverability. What is delivery? What is deliverability, right? What did the mail get delivered? That's when any email send platform tells you what mail was accepted, what mail was rejected. You get bounces back, you can subtract that from the amount of people you tried to send to, and you can end up with the delivered rate. But what you don't understand or don't get from that is what was your actual deliverability rate, or what was your actual deliverability success. Specifically, did mail get delivered to the inbox successfully? Are people actually opening, clicking, engaging with the mail? There's multiple ways you can do that. Like, of course, I have a bias. I work for a deliverability tools vendor. One of our tools is inbox placement testing that specifically helps you measure whether or not you get to the inbox. There's also useful stuff where you can sort of back into that from the sending platform's perspective. Like if you look at your open rates and click rates and how high are they and how do they compare to others, you can tell you're getting deliverability success. Though I imagine Apple's MPP kind of screws that up as far as open tracking. Tonya, what do you think? How has that affected Klaviyo as far as tracking opens and deliverability?
So we actually, built into our tool MPP. So when we are actually segmenting our list in order to send our campaign to subscribers, we actually can, if they have previously triggered an Apple Open or MPP, then you can not send to them. We don't have it necessarily in our reporting yet. However, you can actually set up your different segments in order to see that reporting. So if you in one segment send to MPP equals false, and then add another segment MPP equals true, then you can actually see the difference in the open rates for the two. It's really interesting though, seeing the different, how things have changed over the years. But, basically delivery is, did the mailbox provider accept the message, period, right? Did we get a bounce or did it delay it? And then deliverability is everything else, all encompassing, right? So and deliverability actually encompasses delivery. It's part of it as well, but delivery doesn't encompass deliverability. So if that makes sense, basically, inboxing versus spam filtering, that's deliverability, but also, the message being accepted by the mailbox provider is also deliverability. So it's
yeah, and the important thing there, the reason that those do not, that's a Venn diagram of overlap. The reason that that's not a full circle of full overlap is because ISPs, mailbox providers, your Hotmails, your Gmails, your Yahoos, etc., they do not provide information back to the sender to tell you whether or not you went to the inbox. Right, so you have to use third-party tools, or you have to sort of synthesize it from your stats to try to tell, did your mail actually get delivered to the inbox? And by synthesize that, I mean, you look at your stats, and like higher engagement means you're more likely to have gone to the inbox. Lower engagement means you're more likely to go to the spam folder. But like I said, those are the specific measures there are not something that a Gmail or Hotmail gives back to a sender. So after whether we as Klaviyo or any other sender hands the mail off to a Gmail or a Hotmail, we aren't told what folder it lands in.
Exactly. And so there's a couple of ways to do that. Obviously, like with Kickbox, sending to seed lists, but also benchmarking your stats. So your delivery rate, as well as your open rate and click rate. So if you see a sudden drop in open rate, odds are one of two things happened. You're not resonating with your subscribers and they're not opening it, or messages are going to the spam filter. So, and how do you identify that? Typically it's through testing, right? Whether it's your own seed list, meaning you send to yourself to see if the message goes to the inbox or not, or you send to an seed list provider like Kickbox.
Now, that leads to this reputation, and it sort of starts with you're trying to test whether or not your mail got delivered to the inbox successfully. What are the governing factors that lead an ISP or mailbox provider to decide whether or not mail goes to the inbox? And to sum that all up in one word, that one word is reputation. Tonya, do you want to give an overview of what you think reputation is?
Yeah, so basically mailbox providers, they're the judge and jury of what happens to your mail. After you hit send, there's reputation on IP, reputation on domain, not just like there's multiple domains in a message. And there's reputation on all of that. So we are at the mercy of the recipient mailbox provider. It's all up to them on how, whether messages are rejected or they are filtered, dropped on the floor, etc. So, and reputation, as you can see here, reputation's definitely driven by feedback. So is that feedback, what does that mean? Basically, it's whether it's feedback from your subscribers or feedback that you're giving, like hard bounces, because you're just sending to a bunch of subscribers that don't exist, you're giving them the feedback. They're reading that from you. And then complaints, lack of engagement, that's feedback as well. So you've got good and bad. And so how do we drive good versus bad? I'll let you go over that, Al.
I will, but first I have to come back to this one. And sorry, I did hit the button on it too faster than I intended. I love this slide because it highlights that whether or not you get to the inbox is totally dependent upon how happy our people are with your messages. If you remember the play 12 Angry Men, the very famous play where people in a room, this small group of people in a room decide whether or not this person's going to jail or not. All right, this is the same thing here. The metrics are different. The metrics are a little more complicated than that, than just 12 people sitting around. But mailbox providers literally do ask for feedback. They solicit feedback and they take the natural feedback that comes from the things that we talked about here. Like a lot of these are the bad side of the list here. Spam complaints, right? People reporting that mail as spam. High bounce rates, sending to bunches of addresses that don't exist. Sort of, those are, for example, high bounces is sort of a circumstantial evidence that somebody's a bad sender. And so it might not be the only measure, it might not be the only thing that's going to cause somebody to get blocked, but you put all these things together in sort of a formula to develop a score. And that in a nutshell is the bullet point version of how Gmail spam folder works, right? There's a lot of complexity. They're dealing with billions of data points. There's a whole bunch of machine learning and algorithms and other fancy stuff in there, but it boils down to assimilating and analyzing feedback. The one thing I'll add here too, what does TINS mean? That means this is not spam. So if somebody pulls a message out of a spam folder or clicks the "this is not spam" button, that's a TINS click.
Yep. So common feedbacks, right, is reporting it as spam, unsubscribing, not engaging with the message, deleting it immediately. That they don't necessarily, I guess the spam button created by the mailbox provider is how they ask for your feedback, but they take all kinds of feedback without even asking for it. So if your subscribers really want your messages, they open it, they click on it, they interact with it, they forward it, they read through it, they spend time on it. So that's the feedback that, mailbox providers take. So real quick out, common complaint is that I have changed nothing recently. So why all of a sudden is there a problem?
Oh, I get that all the time. And I always come back with, well, you speed to work every day. How come you only got a ticket today and not yesterday? Right? There's a whole bunch of stuff there. The simplest answer, not the only one, but the simplest answer is the cops are not looking everywhere every day, right? And so maybe they only update the spam filters periodically. Maybe they only look at certain stats at certain periods of time. So that's one thing there that, yeah, you can get away with something for a while. You're not going to get caught doing something wrong every day. But eventually, your past will catch up with you, right? If you're doing the wrong thing for long enough, what's going to happen is your reputation is going to slowly start to degrade. Like if you had a 100% good reputation and it went down to a 99% reputation, dropped by 1 point, right? Based on some mythical measure that Gmail or somebody else is doing. Is that alone going to cause you spam filtering? Probably not yet. But if you keep dropping 1 by 1 by 1 by 1, and then after a week, you drop by 7 points. After 2 weeks, you drop by 14 points. After a month, you drop by 30 points. Suddenly, your spam score doesn't look so good after all. So eventually, you're going to hit a tipping point. That mail is going to start going to the spam folder, or if things are really bad, get blocked outright. So that's why stuff will. The short answer is it'll catch up with you eventually.
Absolutely. So reputation can take an immediate hit by obvious abusive sending, right? So say you are sending and you accidentally send to the list you should have suppressed or something like that, it can take an immediate hit. And typically that's like a 24-hour kind of block or something like that. But when it's very slow and ticks away at your reputation like that, once it does hit that level, all of a sudden it starts, you get blocked or you go to the spam filter. And that's the hardest one to solve because you don't necessarily know exactly what you did wrong. And it also takes much longer to solve. I typically like to say, like, the longer you've had an issue and didn't notice it, it takes twice as long to fix. So
exactly. You can't drive for 6 hours in the wrong direction and then expect to fix it in an hour, right? It takes a while to climb back to where you need to be.
That's absolutely right. We get that a lot. Like, I made the change yesterday. Why don't we see better deliverability today? What do you tell customers that say that to you?
I tell them a couple of things. First, the basis for a lot of these stats. Well, we're reverse engineering how this stuff all works. Like Gmail and Microsoft and Yahoo don't tell us exactly how their filters work. That's on purpose because they don't want bad guys to be able to reverse engineer. So the less people they tell, the less chance they are of people being able to game the filters to figure them out. So that's one of those unfortunate things that it's meant to block really bad guys, but it also affects good marketing centers or not evil marketing centers, right? You weren't intending to do bad. You just want to know what the rules are. But these guys are not always going to tell you what the rules are. So that's the big challenge of our job we're trying to reverse engineer something that's a black box that we don't get all the same feedback signals back that the ISP has internally. So that's the challenge of our job is trying to condense out of the mist a solution, right, without necessarily having all of the data that we wish we had. But to your specific point, when somebody made a change yesterday and was wondering, well, when is that actually going to take, when is that going to happen? Keep in mind what I said about, the matter of degrees or percentages, right? The reputation is going to go up and down, could be slowly, could build or lower, and that could accumulate in either direction over time. And also, in a lot of these cases, think of reputation and the statistics associated with reputation as a rolling 30-day window. And there's a little ambiguity to that. It depends based on the ISP, but at the core, if you're just trying to come up with what's an average, try to think of a rolling 30-day window. In other words, if you're trying to correct something, you're trying to fix a problem, you've corrected the issue. Now at worst, you've got to get 30 days of good, clean living back into play before every mailbox provider is going to see you as your best self again.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, how do we drive good versus bad? That's a common question. So, how do you make sure that your subscribers don't complain? How do you make sure that your subscribers read your messages? And so with that, we often focus on, I love to say, it's quality versus quantity. And once you achieve quality, honestly, and I know this is, very generic, but we can talk deeper into it. But once you achieve quality, then quantity just organically happens because your subscribers it becomes wanted mail, expected mail. It's your subscribers are, interacting with it. Therefore, you have, your subscriber base typically is like a leaky bucket. You've got subscribers that start off very interested, and then over time they just slowly disengage, and then you get new subscribers, and so you're constantly filling that bucket, but it's constantly leaking. If you actually figure out who wants your messages and when they want it, then that helps plug that leaky bucket so much. Now, it's always going to have a tiny leak. That's just organically, that's marketing and advertising, period, right? However, that's why, how do you often figure out who wants it and when they want it?
Exactly. And don't play games with that, right? It's not a question of how close to the edge you can get, because if you get close to the edge, ISPs move the edge over time. You will see Yahoo and Hotmail and Gmail in particular, their filters are getting slowly more stringent year over year. That's one of the positive side effects of having done this for so long. sit and I've been a first party observer to history to watch how Gmail filters have evolved over the last, what is it, since they launched in 2004.
Yeah.
So what was okay maybe yesterday is not guaranteed to be okay tomorrow. So that's my point being there. Don't get close to the edge. It's all about making sure you have clear permission, making sure you're sending wanted mail. Don't play games with that. If you have to sort of argue or come up with a very complex logic behind the legality of why somebody's supposed to get an email message, you're not going to win. If you're in this for the long term, you're not going to win with that as a strategy.
Yeah. That's one thing I was going to mention too is, that's one thing that we, I'm a marketer. And, that's one thing that we say a lot is, or that we ask is, is it against the law? So like what, how do you address that one?
Unfortunately, spam is not against the law in the US. The CAN spam law puts limitations around spam. Like you have to label it as spam and you have to honor unsubscribes, but it doesn't prohibit it. The sort of nice side effect though with CAN spam is it also effectively indemnifies mailbox providers, allowing them to be immune from lawsuits in their best efforts to block spam. So it is nigh impossible, as the GOP found out. It is very difficult to sue a mailbox provider and allege that you're being spam filtered unfairly.
Right.
So keep in mind, ISPs are blocking mail that they want to block based on what their users tell them they want to block. It is all statistics based. It's all reputation based. Very little of it is personality based. Very little of it is targeted to specific content or politics. There could be some tiny bit of it. Who knows? We don't know what's inside of all these filters. But the fact of the matter is, you send wanted mail, you're going to be fine. You don't send wanted mail, you're going to get blocked. And whether or not it's legal is effectively a secondary consideration. Like CAN spam lawsuits are rare, but CAN spam allows ISPs to block stuff, and most of them do it quite well. And so that's sort of an impenetrable shield that bad senders are not going to be very good at getting through.
And you're on mute, Brian.
Yeah, I was going to say, I call it CAN spam. You can spam.
So, wanted mail, how do you find out if it's wanted mail? Oftentimes that's the open rate, right? Is it getting opened? Or, with MPP now, we're moving a lot towards the click rate as well, and marrying those two. But expected mail, like when do your subscribers want the mail? How do you find out that? I love to rely on testing, tons of testing, time of day testing, whether it's wanted mail, testing your subject line, testing the content, for different segments. Also, good data, that doesn't just mean, cleaning out the old and building new. It also means getting to know your subscribers. So that's one great thing about Klaviyo is we are a data company, right? So good data means I can segment off of lots of different things, male, female, or purchase history. Did they purchase a specific item and what their interest? So other common interests that I may want to target them for. And so that's the kind of stuff that, spending the time and really strategizing and being intentional with your messages, that's how you get quality.
Excellent. Now, so let's talk about, there's a whole bunch of don'ts, right? What are some do's? So let's talk about what constitutes best practices, right? It all starts with opt-in and permission, but what else should we be adding to that, Tonya?
So obviously permission, but when it comes to mailbox providers, the biggest thing you can do, or ISPs, I love how we both say different, but the most important thing you can focus on is engagement. And so at Klaviyo, over the past year, we've really made a shift to try to explain to our customers how important engagement is. So it's not just engagement, like no matter what, you send it 30 days, because if they're interested in you, they would have clicked in 30 days. Well, that depends on how often you send, right? So a lot of it has to do with message frequency. How often do you send? And so we have a lot of customers that want to send to 180 days engaged, right? But you can't send to 180 days engaged once a day, because that is, 180 messages or whatever. That's a ton of messages, right? And you can't do 180 days engaged 3 times a day. That's even more messages, right? And so if they don't engage with you for 180 times or 3 times 180 times, what do you think the mailbox provider thinks of you? They think you're deaf. You're not listening to what your subscribers are trying to tell you. They're not interested. So then they will do it on their customers' behalf. On the mailbox provider will do it on their behalf. And so that's why it's important to listen to what your subscribers are telling you. And so if you send daily, it should be 30 days. If you send like 3 times a week, then you can go up to 60 days, 2 times a week, 90, once a week, 180 days, right? And how do you send daily to 180 days engaged? You actually create different segments for each one of those and create a sending calendar. And we actually have that online, but you can actually literally every day send your daily to the daily 30-day segment, and then Monday, Wednesday, Friday send to the 3-day, and then Tuesday, Thursday send to the 2-day, and then Wednesday send to the once a week. So basically Wednesday, there's 3 segments in that campaign, right? And then all the other days there's 2 segments, and that's a great way to listen to your customer and keep those segments, up to date, but you're able to touch them more frequently, and mailbox providers can say, oh, okay, it's highly engaged, and they listen to their subscribers on what they want.
Yeah, and so the key there, right, when we talk about focusing on engagement, right, that means to sending to people who are actively opening and clicking email messages. And the point of that, the whole point of the strategy that Tonya laid out there is to prevent dilution, reduction in engagement stats, because the lower your engagement stats are as measured by mailbox providers, your Gmail, your Hotmail, etc., the more likely you are to find your mail going to the spam folder. If anything, Gmail pioneered this, that low engagement means the mail is probably not wanted, so why should we put it in the inbox? It's kind of an interesting model. Like, not everybody does that model. Apple has sort of look at the bigger picture of 2 different companies, Apple versus Google. Google's all about data, tracking. Apple's more privacy focused, or at least that is certainly their outward stance, their outward statements, that they focus on privacy. They don't want to enable third parties to block you without your knowledge. So you have a scenario where Gmail says send only people that you can track and open and are actually engaging, versus Apple, who set up a barrier to that with the Apple Mail Privacy Protection, right? The MPP that proxies images and affects open tracking and inflates the statistics, makes it easier, or makes it much harder to tell on a per subscriber basis who's open and who clicked. So that's an example of one of the challenges of deliverability right there, right? There's a best practice specific to engagement that one of the bigger mailbox providers actually doesn't necessarily allow people to do. So there's ways around that too that we can talk about, but short story long, bringing it back to short. Make sure that you are focused on engagement. In other words, an email address is not forever. If people are never responding, do something with it. Put it in a win-back campaign, put it in a series of a couple of win-back campaigns. Then if they're never responding, that address should be suppressed after a certain point. That is how you keep your engagement high and maximize your chances of getting to the inbox.
Yeah, I really like that idea. Following up with what you mentioned about just doing like a win-back campaign or something, because from y'all are the email deliverability experts, but from the marketer side, right, we're looking for growth. Like, we have pressures coming from our boss. Hey, let's get some sales, right? Let's work those leads that you have, make the most out of what you got. And so that can kind of lead to this, this mentality of, okay, I'm just going to hit this list over the head, or frequency, or maybe like a mentality of like the more often, the better. But yeah, it's kind of counterintuitive. It's like,
Well,
okay, quality and quantity, but that's one, I think, good middle ground for, okay, you can give these contacts a last chance, but at some point you have to cut it off.
right. And it's important you have to weigh the risk, right? So if you're going to email every day to 180 days engaged, the risk is the mailbox provider is going to send you to the spam folder or block you outright. So then none of your messages get there. Or nobody that isn't, so you may even see your open rate go down at Gmail to 1 to 2%. What does that mean? It doesn't mean everything's going to the spam folder, because some people are opening, right? But it means that anybody that's not like opening constantly, it's going to the spam folder, right? So that's why, it's always, I've never seen Gmail be 0% open rate. I know that it's massively spam filtering if it's 1 to 2% open rate at Gmail. And that's something to keep in mind. You can't just say, overall, my open rate is this, therefore I'm good. You have to look at the different ISPs or mailbox providers, the different domains, and see what those stats are. So especially the big ones. And oftentimes if there's, there's a mistake because one mailbox provider is blocking me and everybody else is doing great. Well, that just means that their rules are different than everybody else's. That's all. It's not necessarily a mistake. But if you do have an issue at 2 mailbox providers, you've got list problems and you need to really solve it. Typically, what I tell customers is, if it's one mailbox provider, let's segment that one mailbox provider and tighten things up for them. If it's more than one, let's do the whole list. Let's do a massive clean of the entire list to make sure that we're not, like, again, slowly degrading that reputation where it already picked up on one, but it hasn't on the others, but it will eventually, right? So that's really what's important. So
yeah, back in my Exact Target days, we had a magical report called the Email Performance by Domain Report. And that was a deliverability consultant's best friend, because just like you say, it would break down the stats by the top domains. And you'd look for it, just like you said, for ones that are outliers, ones that are not delivering while other ones are delivering. And for example, and sometimes it's fair and sometimes it's not. For example, if you see your Microsoft stats, like your Microsoft open rate is probably almost half of your Yahoo or Gmail open rate. And that's because Gmail is harsher about Microsoft is harsher about tracking and blocking. If you see Microsoft going to the spam folder and no others, yeah, it could be that Microsoft's being mean. If you see Gmail is going to the spam folder and no others, then Gmail probably doesn't like your engagement rate. But sort of regardless of the underlying math or policy or even religion about why an ISP might choose to block it, Tonya's guidance is solid there. Focus on segmenting out and specifically adjusting practices to fit a scenario when you have a single mailbox provider filtering mail or blocking mail. And like she said, when it gets broader than just one, then it's time to look at what's going on with the list overall and how to fix that overall, because you have a broader problem. And you might be lucky in that perhaps it just hasn't caught up with all the mailbox providers yet, because they all have different mechanisms. They have different views of the universe. They don't all have the same stats every day, but the big providers in particular can be a good sort of canary in the coal mine. If they start to go bad, then you've got a list problem that you have to tackle.
Yeah, and we've gotten some, a few questions in the chat about, hey, this specific mailbox provider is blocking me. What are you, like, are you gonna fix it? Is Klaviyo, is Kickbox, are they gonna fix it? But yeah, I think it's important to differentiate, where the decisions are being made, on the sending platform side or the mailbox provider side. So we're saying there's something about the mailbox provider, right?
Yeah, and we're going to touch on in a minute a little more about like shared IP versus dedicated IP strategy,
I was
and that
just
that might that might tie into that a little better. I'm just thinking.
Yeah.
Before we do, well, I think we could start bottom up. That's a good segue right here. So we talked about IP versus shared IPs versus dedicated IPs. I know in my long history of doing deliverability stuff, if you send tons of wanted email, dedicated IPs are better because you build your own reputation as yourself. You stand up for your mail better. You are less affected by the mailing problems potentially caused by other subscribers. How does that fit within what Klaviyo does, and what's your take on that, Tonya?
Yeah, so we do have some rules around, who can typically get a dedicated IP versus on the shared IP pool. If you are sending more than 1 million messages a month, you definitely should be on dedicated IPs. Anything under that, it's typically or the volume is very spread out. It's not reliable on when you're going to send the messages. That's a great time to be on the shared IP pool. But even on the shared IP pool, you have to follow best practices in order for your messages to be delivered, because oftentimes reputation can massively be tied to the friendly from domain. So what does that mean? It's the from email address and the domain and the from email address that your recipients actually see. So not the sending domain. At Klaviyo, we have our sending domain. Not that domain's important, but reputation's also tied to that from domain. And so it's important that whether you're on dedicated IP or shared IP, that you follow best practices and send to engaged subscribers, because you can't really hide in the shared IP pool anymore. Back in the day, you kind of could, because everything was IP reputation, and they've gotten away less and less, where that's all they focus on. Wouldn't you agree, Al?
Absolutely. There's a certain class of senders, putting on my compliance hat for a minute there. There's a certain class of senders who were actively sort of exploiting that, sort of being able to hide in the shared IP pool. So what I mean by that is they send lots of low quality mail. It could be payday loans, it could be Forex stuff. There's certain industries where they just they don't necessarily adhere to best practices, and they send tons and tons of mail, sort of flipping that around, trying to do the quantity over quality, sort of backwards from what Tonya or I would do. And those opportunities to get away with that have really dried up. And the perfect example of that is how Gmail has come to focus so strongly on domain reputation, in addition to and on top of IP reputation. It means that, like to Tonya's point, in the past, you could get away with having good senders on a shared pool and then also having a bunch of bad senders, and then everybody gets to the inbox because it's all sort of a blended IP reputation. Well, that's always been a frustration point for mailbox providers. So you can't expect that it's something you can get away with forever. And that's exactly how it turned out, that those opportunities are drying up. Domain reputation now applies on top of that, where the biggest mailbox providers are getting smart enough to be able to tell the good from the bad senders apart better on shared IPs. It still means that there's still some scenarios where it's better for you to be on dedicated IPs if you're a good sender and sending lots of mail. But it also means that this is another example, like we talked to before, the evolution of deliverability, like what was okay yesterday is not going to be okay tomorrow. You can't just sort of shovel kind of wanted mail and it does okay, and it's kind of low quality. The opportunities to get away with that are severely declining.
Question from the chat, actually a few about the process of moving to a dedicated IP. I know that could be another webinar on its own, but actually one person brought up an example of them doing a rebrand, right? So they'll just be named different. I guess they'll have to buy a totally different domain name. So what would that entail for them? Should they wait until after the rebrand, or?
I'm sorry.
What do you think?
I'm sorry, what was that? I was reading. Sorry about that. I was reading comments.
No worries. It's it's a scenario where they're rebranding. Well, two things just overall. Let's take it higher level first. What's the process for a customer to Klaviyo customer to identify should they go to dedicated IP, and then if so, how do they do it?
Yeah, so again, so if they are a managed account, meaning they have a CSM or onboarding specialist, and they send over 1 million messages per month, then absolutely dedicated IPs. Whenever they switch over to dedicated IPs or start off with dedicated IPs, there is a warming period. And in that warming period, the main focus of our customer is to focus on engagement, sending the highest engaged subscribers. You want to put your best foot forward. And with that, you're going to send to your highest engaged subscribers. So mailbox providers are like, oh, they're a trusted sender. Let's go ahead and let them in the mailbox. Now, does that mean that from the get-go, all your messages go to the inbox? No. A lot of mailbox providers will do tests where they'll do some in the inbox, some in the spam filter, and so that they'll see the tens clicks, right? This is not spams clicks, because if your subscribers really want your mail, they'll go find it and they'll move it over to the inbox. And so that's a great way that mailbox providers really find out whether or not your mail is legit, right? With regards to, say you're rebranding and you've got, you're already sending from dedicated IPs and you want to change your sending domain. If you've used that domain in your friendly from, say you're sending from the shared sending domain right now, and you're like, oh, maybe I should use a dedicated sending domain. If you've already used that domain to send email, it's not necessary to warm that domain for branding. However, if it's a brand new domain, like newly registered in the last 30 days and or has never sent email, then you need to do a warming strategy just like you do with an IP. Wouldn't you agree, Al?
Yeah, I think so. What we tell people is domain warming is important, but it doesn't necessarily have to be as complex as IP warming. But in a full rebrand where you're switching domains, if you're not sure how to do it, if you use the IP warming template, you will be well covered, because it goes to, all I mean by that is IP warming. If you do domain warming only as much as you have to, and you do IP warming only as much as you have to, IP warming goes deeper and spreads it out more. Versus domain warming, you could introduce it in chunks. It doesn't have to be as little bits per day. You could just do it over a couple of weeks, and you're probably going to be okay. But if you're not sure, if it's a new domain and you've only done it with IP warming before, anything like that, if you apply that IP warming strategy for a domain warming, it's going to work very well.
And also, I saw a question in here. So when we rebrand, well, we need to rewarm our IP. So if you have a dedicated IP and you completely rebrand, meaning you change your sending domain, you change the host name on your dedicated IP, if that domain is brand new, that still holds true. If that domain is brand new, newly registered, it is best to rewarm your IP and everything. Just like you would, your domain, the same thing. It's because, mailbox providers and actually block lists look at that, the PTR record or the host name of the IP, and that domain does carry reputation.
Exactly.
I've actually had it happen with Spam House Blocked once because I didn't realize that was a big deal. And it only had to do with the host name of the IP, not the friendly from, not the from domain, none of that, not the sending domain. It was the host name. We changed it, and it was a brand newly registered domain, and Spam House was like, no.
Yeah, that's the thing about deliverability sometimes. We end up being the weird stuff department.
Exactly. That's the truth.
So speaking of weird stuff, mix it up a little bit. You know, we talked, the whole thing is deliverability strategy. We touched on a lot of it here, right? I think we had a good sort of organic discussion around engagement strategy and why that's important. We just touched on IP and domain strategy. This is a good segue to maybe to talk about some more Klaviyo specifics that can help. And here is my favorite. And by the way, in our follow-up email where we send out a link to the recording and everything, we'll have links to all this stuff that we talk about, like guides for shared IP versus dedicated IP consideration, domain setup, that sort of thing. But the one thing I wanted to highlight here is, if there's one thing you can do that will help improve deliverability in Klaviyo, I think it's this. Now, there's a whole bunch of other stuff you also need to do, like deliverability is a multi-headed monster, right? It's an octopus with 100 different tentacles, and they're all coming at you trying to grab your mail out of the inbox. But the point here is that this one thing helps you set yourself up so that you are authenticating your mail with your domain. This is DKIM authentication, domain keys identified mails. What that means, and it's domain authentication, it's very specific to help you look like you to Gmail and Hotmail, Yahoo, etc., versus just looking at as though as you're identifiable only as one of 1,000 different Klaviyo customers in whatever pool or group you're in. So this one thing here, finalize setting up your dedicated sending domain in Klaviyo. If there's one takeaway from here that I think everybody should do, it's this. Again, you know, there's other stuff as well. It's not the only thing in the deliverability playbook, but I want every Klaviyo client to know this.
I agree. I would say, you know, mailbox providers love a good alignment, right? So, and I think this also goes into the next slide. Don't we say something about, click tracking? So basically, you know, there's strict alignment and relaxed alignment. And relaxed alignment to me is, you know, that's the way to go. Basically with, you know, your click tracking domain, having a dedicated click tracking domain, a dedicated sending domain, and having the actual root domain be the same. I think mailbox providers appreciate that, and I think you're rewarded for it. So it's just one of the ways that, you know, so not only DKIM, but also, you know, dedicated sending domain, dedicated click tracking, turning on SSL, so that, you know, you're showing like, hey, we're trustworthy. And I really think that's, and then of course it's, you know, IPs having the dedicated host name. So if you have a dedicated IP, we actually update the host name to align with your sending domain. And so then you have relaxed alignment. So alignment meaning all through your full headers and your email itself, the body of the message, you have a common link. And that is how, you know, that's how not only mailbox providers, but recipients trust your email. Like I'll tell you this, if I go and I'm like, something looks weird about this mail, the first thing I do is go look at the actual links and do they align with what I expect them to be? And if they do, then, you know, and no cousin domains. You want to explain what cousin domains are, Al?
I do. And sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
No, you're good.
Cousin domains are the bane of my existence. Cousin domains or lookalike domains are alternate domains that you might make because you had to. Maybe you had a technical challenge. Like if you set yourself up, like my blog is spamresource.com. Maybe I wasn't able to use that for email. So maybe I registered spamresourcemail.com and I'm sending mails that. That's a perfect example of a cousin domain. The problem with cousin domains, and there's tons of them out there because they used to be considered less of a bad practice. In some scenarios, a good practice going back for years. And when something gets set up 10 years ago, it can end up lasting forever. But the problem with cousin domains is that while good people can set them up, so can bad people. And so if you use a cousin domain, you're training your subscriber base to care not as much about what domain
sends mail on your behalf. In other words, you could set them up so that they might trust mail from a bad guy next time. If they're sending mail as, so, if I use spamresourcemail.com, maybe somebody else could set up spamresourceemail.com, spamresource2.com, spamresource3.com, as opposed to the best practice of using your core domain. If everything I send says spamresource.com on it, it has no other domain, and it all authenticates properly, and it aligns, like to Tonya's point, align meaning that the domain matches the whole way through, like click.spamresource.com, and the bounce domain, the from domain, the DKIM domain, if all of that aligns with only spamresource.com, that is a significantly positive thing, both for spam filters to be able to authenticate that mail and tie a reputation to it, but also for individual recipients. So you don't have to worry, does my mom who bought from my store, does she know what Klaviyo.com means, versus if it has my store's name in there and that's the only domain in there, that's going to be easier for people who receive your mail to recognize as you.
Absolutely. And one thing I often get question of, so if I send from this domain, that's the same as my corporate domain? How do I separate my company messaging to each other and to, customers, one-off stuff? How do I separate that from the marketing messages that we send through Klaviyo? It is called a subdomain. So that is the email dot or before the root domain. And typically your corporate mail is just the corporate email address with, so it's just the root domain. But when you do marketing dot or email dot, that is a great way to separate those so that if you do run into deliverability issues due to your sending practices for marketing, it doesn't affect messages going to your corporate mail.
Yep, very important. And I see that a lot where people dabble in cold leads, and they do a bunch of cold leads, and it tanks their domain reputation, meaning it makes their mail go to the spam folder, in particular at Microsoft and Google hosted domains. And then that activity drags down their corporate mail and their marketing mail sent through an ESP or CRM. So meaning that the cold lead activity, sending bunches of unwanted email, there's a lot of tools out there that do that. Google's starting to crack down on them, which is fabulous to see, because they send a lot of unwanted mail, and it's been kind of tough for Google and others to police. But what happens there is you send a bunch of cold leads, it damages your domain reputation, and it'll affect the mail you send from Klaviyo or Salesforce or MailChimp or wherever it is. In other words, domain reputation, when you use the same domain at a whole bunch of places, it can intermingle and overlap, and stream one could cause problems for stream two. And to Tonya's point, subdomains, segmentation, keeping the stuff separate is how you keep from blowing up a good thing. Now, honestly, I don't want you to do cold leads at all, because I don't think they're a long-term marketing practice for success. But the practical matter is, no matter what you're engaged in, you're going to have separate streams of business, separate stuff going on, corporate mail versus marketing mail. And the more you can keep that stuff segmented, for example, by the use of subdomains, the better off you are from a reputation perspective.
Absolutely.
So I think we'll have time for another question or two. But before we do, let's pretend we're a podcast, and here's a message from our sponsor. But I don't want to sell anybody too hard, but I just want to remind people that I work for Kickbox, and we have a whole bunch of cool deliverability tools. That includes email verification. Somebody asked in the chat, how do you get rid of spam traps? Email verification is not a magic tool to prevent spam traps. We're not trying to have people feed in bad lists and suddenly get good lists out of it, but you set this up as part of your sign up process, or run legacy data through it. So what it does do is it helps you get rid of a whole bunch of invalid addresses. There's a whole, typos, invalid stuff, address churn. Email verification can help improve deliverability. Again, it's not a magic bullet, but it can help bolster your deliverability by improving your data quality. If you have any interest in that or any other stuff that Kickbox can do, like I said, I'm the product manager for the email deliverability side of things. We've got a whole tool suite with inbox testing and more. Feel free to reach out to me. I can help. But end of promotion. Back to the questions.
Yeah, real quick. So getting rid of spam traps. That's the canary in the coal mine. That's the clue. If you have a lot of spam traps, that means you've either, I mean, several things could happen. Your login process is not safe, or sign up process is not safe from bot traffic. You purchased a bad list. You aren't removing subscribers over time that haven't engaged. And so it's important that you don't try to just remove the spam trap. You actually try to fix the cause of the spam trap. Eventually, if you remove unengaged subscribers, eventually that spam trap should fall off your list. And 1 or 2 spam traps, not the end of the world, but a lot is.
Yeah, even that term, right? Like the term removing the spam traps, right? One question somebody asked is, how is Kickbox different from other verification solutions? A lot of it is, we don't advertise that stuff, right? You go on other verification solutions, they'll say, hey, we do spam trap removal, but even that phrase makes it sound like, okay, you identify them and remove them after the fact, but really it should be, how do I prevent them, right? It's more of a preventative measure. So one way you can incorporate our solution also is to make sure that there's good data coming in from the front end, right? So collecting, of course, from opt-in sources, but even on those opt-in forms, or, if you have a checkout page or something like that, especially if it's further down the funnel, and you want to make sure that those transactional emails, those really important ones, are getting to them. Let's say if they buy a ticket or something, they need that transactional email. They need that confirmation email. Can't have it go into spam. Or maybe they mistyped it or something like that. That's another way that you can use it and verify, hey, is this an actual deliverable address? Is anybody home? So that's really important to note.
I love having a list verification tool on a sign up form or on a checkout form, because when you are excited about making a purchase and you're filling in your information, it's easy to typo something, and then all of a sudden you're not getting those messages. So I think, catching typos, stuff like that, it's really important. Now, uploading a full list that you purchased in order to remove bad addresses, not my favorite use of the tool. And why would you say that, Al?
We have our compliance lead, Mark. That also makes him very unhappy when that happens. We've got a bunch of automation, and then we've also got Mark. And if either of those catch somebody uploading a purchase list, we terminate that account. So that's from our perspective, we're the only email verification provider that goes that extra mile to proactively block use of purchase data. That's a necessary thing for us, because somebody like us, we have a dual constituency to serve. We want to help our clients clean their list, clean their data, but at the same time, we have to do it in a way that is not abusive to the rest of the internet. We are a member of MOG, the Messaging and Mobile Anti-Abuse Working Group. That is a mailbox provider and telco provider, data provider focus group of entities that work together to combat abusive communication related things. Email spam being at the core of that. And so we're a part of that, and we work closely with those entities, which includes all the biggest mailbox providers, to make sure that we are not facilitating or enabling spam, and helping our customers understand why it's important to send within the guidance of best practices. So if you're asking me from my perspective, what's different about Kickbox is that our focus is additionally on anti-abuse and stopping bad activity, at the same time helping clients succeed with deliverability success through application of best practices, through email verification, and so forth.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Y'all got time for one more?
Sure.
I do.
I think the other most common one that I see, the most common question is about MPP and how to handle that within Klaviyo. And also, whether or not those, like, how do you segment based on engagement if those numbers could be inflated?
So, Tonya, of course, this is ultimately yours to answer, but I will throw in my 2 cents, which is that MPP, and by the way, like if you go look on Spam Resource or even the Kickbox blog, I and my colleague Jennifer blogged about MPP quite a bit. So there's a bunch of data there for getting into the details of what does MPP actually blow up. But long story short, while MPP makes open tracking inaccurate, it is probably still good enough for deliverability segmentation to boost your reputation. So in other words, even though it is less perfect than it was a couple of years ago, still do it. It's still a good path to success. And Tanya even mentioned that Klaviyo has tools to help you identify MPP versus not, right?
Right. Absolutely. So when you're setting up segmentation, if you're sending just to a list, that's one thing. But if you really want to remove MPP, you can set up a segment of your list that has MPP equal false, and that will remove the known Apple privacy, recipients. So they don't have to be Apple domains, right? Right, Al? They could be Gmail, they could be anything. And so that's why that, segmenting for that is a great way to do that. And if you want to, send to even those subscribers, you can create 2 segments, one with false and one with true. And then that way send to both. And that way you can see your regular messages, the open rate, what it is, and then compared to the MPP open rate. So you can actually see like how inflated it actually is, right?
Mm-hmm. Cool.
Yeah, and somebody had dropped a help doc, I think, of yours, or a knowledge library article on exactly how to do that. So
Yep.
Yeah, we can send that in the follow-up as well. But man, I feel like we really didn't even get to to get through a lot of these questions. It's awesome to see how engaged everybody is and anxious to learn more, and really eager to learn more. Like I'll mention, it's a whole universe, right? And you're never finished learning. It's constantly evolving, and we have to stay on the cutting edge of it. So that's why we're here today. But if anybody has any additional questions,
I do want to thank my team. They are answering questions in the chat, and I just want to thank them enormously. So Zakia, Hannah, and Steve, I've seen all in the chat. I'm sure Autumn's in there as well. And so I really want to thank them. I have an amazing team. And so I wanted to thank them for jumping in and helping to answer some of the questions that are in the chat.
Right on. Yeah, and that's a good reminder too. If you have questions, engage your account manager.
Yep.
And resources available to you from both sides, right?
So, right,
Kickbox
reach
side.
out to your account manager, or even open up a ticket with support to ask, like, do I have this resource, or how can I get help? And that'll be a great way. But if you have an account manager, reach out to them. That's the best way to go about it, to find out if you can get deliverability resources.
Great. All right. Well, we appreciate everybody's time for joining us. We are going to send resources that are relevant to this, including the recording of this. So you can go back and watch it again if you need to, if you missed any parts. And yeah, we'll be sending that pretty soon. If you need additional help, reach out to your account manager, engage them. If you haven't tried Kickbox yet, go sign up for a free account and use it before your next send. Before you do your next send, verify your list, make sure that you're sending to deliverable email addresses. So give that a try. We will follow up soon. Tonya, Al, thank you so much for sharing your expertise. It's awesome, and yeah, I learned something every webinar too. So appreciate you sharing.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Take care.